Welcome to Legends in Leadership, brought to you by ISF and the Carrington Group. Legends in Leadership is an inspirational podcast featuring the stories of leaders who are making a difference. Our goal is to inspire you with the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, overcome challenges, and ultimately rise up to make a difference in people's lives.
To episode number 64 of Legends in Leadership. It's great to be on this virtual podcast. We were hoping to be back in the studio this week, but we are coming to you virtually again to bring you, I know, a great interview and great content. I'm, of course, a family officer with the Carrington Group. Want to welcome Jason Smith to the show, who's also a partner of mine and a fellow family officer at the Carrington Group. And then, as always, the infamous Dr. Blair Ritchie, who's the executive director of the International Student Foundation. It's great to be on the show with you guys today. Excited about our guests. But before we dive in to our interview, we like to kick off each of our shows with a little bit of leadership trivia. We're fascinated by the stories of leaders who, like us, come from humble beginnings and then rise up as leaders in people's lives. So, Dr. Blair, what do you have teed up for episode 64's trivia today?
All right. We have a lot in common as hosts of this wonderful podcast. And one of the things we all share is that we're all sports enthusiasts. And today happens to be, this very day, the 10th anniversary of the passing of one of my favorite leaders of all time. He was an amazing man, an amazing coach, passed away 10 years ago today, 4 months shy of his 100th birthday. His pyramid of success is one of the great leadership pieces of all time. He grew up at a poor Indiana farm, and like most farms in Indiana, he had a basketball hoop in the barn. And after an All-American career at Purdue University, he took his first job as a high school English teacher and a basketball coach. And man, could he coach. He became the first person to be inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame as both a player and a coach. His teams dominated college basketball like no other program in history. But even more significant was the influence he had as a builder of men and a maker of leaders. So who is this legendary leader? I'll be back at the close of the program today with the answer.
Ooh, I think I might know this one. I know Jason does. We're gonna give Jason the softball for sure.
No,
maybe Christine knows too.
I have a guess, but
Okay.
I'm not really. I don't know that I would actually know. But yes,
He's
I do have a guess.
written a book as well.
Lots of books. In fact.
Well,
Lots of books.
that helps me. I think I'm right then.
Yes, that is great. Well, it's really exciting to have our guest on the show today, Christine Hoover. I get the pleasure at the Carrington Group to serve Christine and her husband, Kyle, as a part of our community of families at the Carrington Group. Christine and Kyle live in Charlottesville, Virginia. I got to visit them at the end of last year, and what a cool little town, University of Virginia. There, and just a great little town, great little place. They moved to Charlottesville in 2008 to plant a church together. They've got 3 boys, and of course, Christine is busy. So when she's not being a mom or trying to serve alongside Kyle in the church ministry, she has keeping herself busy, to say the least. She's authored 5 books that range from addressing how the gospel informs leadership and service, how it informs our daily lives, friendships, and really how the gospel teaches us how to walk by faith in this groaning world. And I was reading that piece, Christine, you talked about this groaning world, and man, what a broken world that we are living in today. And so I'm looking forward to chatting with you a little bit about that. She's also a podcast host. Her podcast is called By Faith. She is a speaker and a Bible teacher, and ultimately really loves getting to share the gospel truths with other women through her speaking and writing. So, Christine, great to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this over the last couple of months, knowing that we were approaching this interview. But what we like to do on our show, we're a leadership show, and so we like to rewind the tape a little bit. We want to hear about your journey and really how God has led you down the path that He's led you, and tell us where you grew up and a little bit about your early life to get started.
Sure. Well, I grew up in East Texas in Tyler, and that was actually where I had my first leadership experience. When I was in high school, I was in the band, and my freshman year, I remember we had section leaders, and our peers voted on that. And so I got voted my freshman year to be a section leader. And that was shocking to me. I had never considered before that I had any sort of leadership potential. But my band director said, they got it right. I see that in you. And that was the first time anybody had ever said that to me. I had never considered that before. And so that's really in Tyler, Texas, is where I started learning how to be a leader, how to influence other people, to use the influence that I had to bless other people and to serve them. After high school, I went to Texas A&M for college, and
She's an Aggie.
I am an Aggie. I know. Met my husband there. We both were involved in leadership in student-run organizations there. That's one thing I love about A&M is that it produces leaders, and I was one of the beneficiaries of that by getting to lead an organization of about 300 people during college. And so again, just through that experience, I learned that God had gifted me with the ability to lead and to influence people. And how was I going to use that? And it was during those years that I really felt clearly that God was calling me to go into some sort of vocational ministry. And I didn't know what that meant necessarily. I didn't have any specific ideas of that. But in meeting my husband there, and he also felt a call to vocational ministry. And so as we got more serious, it just kind of made sense to me that we would be a good pair, a good team. And I've really enjoyed serving alongside him. We're pretty different, but we both kind of see the world in the same way, and we see leadership in the same way. So I've learned a lot from him, and hopefully he could say the same about learning from me. But that's kind of the background of when I first dipped my toe into leadership opportunities.
So you're in College Station, and the way I understand it, you didn't just go straight to Charlottesville, Virginia. So tell us about the stops in between and some of the, I guess you could say, the crossroads in your journey that have really been learning experiences that have led you guys where you are today.
Sure. Well, when we got married, we lived in Fort Worth. We were finishing seminary there, both of us. And my husband got a job at a church, actually the church we had gone to in College Station. And so we moved back there as adults. And that was a really weird transition to go from being a student in a college town to being an adult in a college town. And we spent 8 years there. The ministry was already established, but we got to jump in and kind of make it our own. And, that was when we were learning to work together, my husband and I. How could I help and benefit him? At the same time, we were having kids. And that was a huge challenge for me. I remember when my first son was born, he was born in May. And through that summer, there's a lot of fun things that happen in college ministry in the summer. And I really couldn't involve myself in those things anymore. We'd always been a pair and working together. It wasn't my job necessarily, but I loved to help him. And suddenly I couldn't do that anymore. And that was a turning point for me because I didn't know, how do I do this thing that I love, which is being a mom. I've always wanted to be a mom, but how do I also continue to use my gifts in ways outside the home that I feel God is calling me to do that? And so through those years, I had to step back a lot. And that was challenging for me. But it was good for me in the end to learn how to, I guess it challenged pride in me that I didn't always have to be seen in order to serve, that I could do things behind the scenes and help my husband behind the scenes. And that was significant work, including raising my kids. But it was through those years in College Station that we really started to feel like the box was getting a little small, that I don't know if I mentioned, but my husband was doing college ministry. So he had a very specific age group that we were serving. And it started to feel a little small to us. We started to really be talking a lot more about the larger church and how we wanted to see God's church be. And we had ideas about that. And it was through those conversations that we really began to sense that God was calling us to plant a church, which for anyone who doesn't understand that terminology, is basically you're starting a church from scratch. And that was when we decided to pursue that. We knew we were supposed to do that, but we didn't know where. And so it was through a lot of conversation and prayer that we realized we wanted to go to another college town where outside the Bible Belt, where there was more of a need for a church that was teaching the Bible. And through many months, we came to the understanding that Charlottesville existed. I didn't even know it existed before, but it's kind of funny because we started with this map of the U.S. and we put all we just went through the conferences and put college towns on the map, just thinking, well, I mean, how are we supposed to know? But it was through many months of prayer. God made it very clear. And we came to visit Charlottesville and we fell in love with it the first time we were here. And we came. Here we are, 12 years later.
You're the mother of 3 boys. So being the youngest of 4 brothers, I can relate to the life of a household full of boys. So talk a little bit. You shared, Christine, this kind of crossroads that you were at there, this path that you're trying to go down, trying to figure out how, God's really calling you, or at least what he's calling you to do in your life. And then you've got to be a mom. So what have you learned from your 3 boys, and how have they helped you grow and mature as a leader through that, or at least in this chapter? It's a new chapter as they've gotten older, but how have they shaped you in your leadership journey?
Well, I would say one of the biggest shapings that they have done to me, my boys are 17, 14, and 12 now. My oldest was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. And that just changed my entire life. And obviously it was very difficult, but through him, I learned compassion. I would have said before, I was pretty black and white and things need to be this way. And I would look at other people and think, why aren't they doing it the way I think they should? And through him, I developed compassion and empathy that has been so pivotal for me in leadership, to be able to sit with someone and to listen to them and to hear something they're struggling with, or they're doubting, or there's pain, and to be able to sit in that and to not always be able to know exactly what they're feeling, but to be able to empathize with pain and with the uncertainty of the future and that kind of thing. That has really shaped me and helped me, I think, be a more compassionate leader. But in terms of trying to juggle all the things, because when we moved to Charlottesville, I also started writing and pursuing that. And it's really become a job for me. And so I've had to learn how to kind of manage my life in terms of segments of my day, to say, when my kids are at school, I'm working, but when they're home, I'm fully engaged with them. And I'm fully engaged with my husband when he's home and helping him. So it's like my life is lived in these segments. And that's helped me too, to learn how to manage my time, to learn how to prioritize what to give my attention to and what to say no to. So they've helped me in that too, raising the kids.
Christine, it's been a really interesting time, to say the least, in our country for the first half of 2020. And I'm curious on multiple fronts. I mean, here you and Kyle are, you've planted a church in Virginia, and then COVID happened. And of course, we know all of the changes and the ebbs and flows of COVID and how that's impacted so many people. And then now we're seeing the protests and unrest across our country. How are you guys approaching that in your household? Is one piece of this that I'm very interested in, and then of course through your ministry and your church community, how have you guys been able to juggle probably the most tumultuous time in our country's history, at least in the last 50 to 60 years. Tell us a little bit about how you guys are navigating that.
It's taken a lot of leadership. My husband and I have talked about that this is requiring a lot of intentional leadership. And that's good. I'm thankful that our church is 12 years old. So we're stable. We have good leaders at the table with us. But it's required us to be very intentional and to think through, okay, suddenly all the things we were doing, we can't do anymore. How are we going to transition very, very quickly to everything online? And honestly, it's given us a perspective of, hey, there are tools that we can use even moving forward that we had never considered. So we've really tried to communicate more through, we're doing webinars. So we've done my husband and I did a webinar for married people during quarantine. How do we, we're just always with each other. How do we manage that? How do we navigate that? How can it be an opportunity? But also for singles, we have a lot of singles in our church. So for people who live alone or they have housemates, how we did a webinar for them, asking our single people to share what are they learning and that kind of thing. So I think we're really taking advantage of the opportunities that this presents. For my husband, it's requiring a lot of decision making that we're still in Virginia, we're still pretty closed. And so moving forward, he's making a lot of decisions with that. But then moving into the unrest in our country, I just had a conversation with him today about how can we help our people in our church think through these things, but also our children. How are we communicating with them and talking with them about some really difficult things, and not just difficult things, but things that, have been happening, or there's so much complexity to it in our history, and how are we communicating that with them? So we're trying to address it. That's the main thing, is just having the conversations and thinking through how can we help people to think about these things biblically. But one good thing, we mentioned earlier, we're from Charlottesville. So that name, that city, that immediately rings a bell with people, because in 2017, as you all know, we had this Unite the Right rally, and then we had people who were protesting that, and it ended up being very violent. People lost their lives. So we kind of have had a head start in our community with dealing with these things. And we were not, to be very clear and honest, we were not prepared for that when it happened. But out of that came some really good things in our city. One being, we realized we don't know a lot of other pastors in our community. We know them, but we don't have relationships with them and their wives. And so we need to have those, because we weren't ready. We didn't know, we were not communicating with one another. We weren't working together. And so we started doing, my husband and I both were like, we're going to start something. We're going to start gathering pastors and their spouses together, and we're going to know one another, so that when something like this happens, we are ready to respond. We don't have to start from scratch. And so thankfully, we have had that for the past few years, and that's helping us in just being able to have conversations with other people, other leaders, and saying, how are we going to respond to this?
I'm always interested, having been a church planter myself. I have such a heart for church planters, and it's kind of like spiritual entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
And there's usually a lot of entrepreneurship in the DNA of church planters. So let's talk about a little bit your own journey as an entrepreneur and the leadership side of that, what you've learned through launching something new versus being a part of something that's always existed.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's exciting to know that you have had that experience too. I really loved the work of church planting. Now I would say we're an established church, but one thing I learned from that is that the DNA of who we are as people, my husband and I, is implanted into the DNA of the church. And when I realized that, that's sobering to think about, but it's also so exciting to watch that the things that we're excited about, that we're passionate about, that we wanted, that, even when we started, we sat down with our core group and we said, what do we envision this church to be like? That some of those things that we talked about have been implanted into our church because it was things that we cared so much about. And that is a joy to me. But again, it's sobering, and it's helped me to see that my character, my integrity, my connection and intimacy with the Lord, how I walk with God and how I love people is so important, because people will model themselves after that. So I find that to be a joy, and sometimes
a lot of pressure.
A little scary. I don't necessarily see it as pressure, but it's a good reminder to me that what I'm telling other people needs to be true in my own life.
Very, very good. Tell us, you're a podcaster, and you've also authored 5 books, and that in itself is impressive. Tell us a little bit about your journey of getting into podcasting and your love for writing, and just kind of what's inspired you as a speaker and a writer.
I started writing when we moved to Charlottesville, actually. I'd always wanted to do it. It's just always been in the back of my mind. I felt a compulsion to begin. And I suddenly had time, which sounds kind of weird when you think about starting something new. But we didn't know a single person in our community when we came. And so I didn't have relational things pulling at me. So I started writing. And through that, it just became a greater compulsion. I love writing because it enables me to think about what I actually think. It's like I can't know what I think until I write it. Mm-hmm. And when I started writing how I was experiencing things and seeing people resonate with that, I loved that. I loved being able to voice for people what sometimes they can't voice for themselves, at the same time that it helps me to know and to work through things. And so I started pursuing publication, and I was so excited to be able to get to do that and to continue to do that. And the podcast really came out of one of my books. It's called Searching for Spring, and it's really about suffering and having hope in suffering. And I wanted to hear other people's stories. And so I just thought, I'm just going to do a little short podcast season and get to hear people's stories. And once I started, I really loved it, and I wanted to continue. So I've decided to do seasons where I focus on certain things. So I did a season on friendship because I wrote a book about that. I've done a season on serving. I've done a season on stories, hearing people's testimonies, things like that. And I've just loved it. So I'm going to keep going.
That's really great. As you look at our culture today, what do you see as the biggest setback for leaders out there and the challenges that they face? We have a very interesting culture that seems to ever change. So how do you combat that? What are you doing as parents, and what are you doing as leaders, and how do you try to, I guess you could say, battle this tide that's pushing against us?
I think one of the greatest challenges we face, and as anyone can see, is just how divided we are. And I think that social media really exacerbates that. And so what I am telling myself as I'm leading myself, as I'm speaking with other people, is to remember that what is happening on social media is not necessarily the real world. I mean, yes, we do get news from it. We do get information. But my connection with the issues that, let's say, what's happening right now with the police and race and unrest and riots, that is true. In reality, it's happening. But how I engage with that issue needs to be in my community, not online. Sure, I can engage online. I hope this is making sense. But I just think we're losing a sense of connection with real life community. We're living very disembodied lives, meaning we're online versus I'm a person in a community with relationships. And I think that we're being discipled by that, by what we're reading on social media. But true discipleship happens in relationship. And so I think that's something that I'm telling myself, I'm telling my children, the importance of friendship and relationship and learning from real people and talking about these things with real people. And that's also what I'm trying to communicate with the people in our church. Just there's a place for social media, but being engaged in an embodied way is how we are meant to live and to grow.
And I find it interesting. There's a abbreviation TLDR that gets thrown out on social media. It stands for too long didn't read. And so you mix this this sense of a lack of true commitment to learn from others, and it feels like you're having conversations, but you're really just spewing your own point of view and then leaving. And whenever the first time I saw that TLDR, I was like, wow, how disrespectful. Like, someone took the time to write something of length and to try to put some nuance into their thoughts. And your first comment is TLDR, but here's what I think. Right.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think sometimes social media becomes, it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever read, I'm going to forget the Amusing Ourselves to Death is a book where this was before the internet. And he talks about how even when the telegraph became something that suddenly news could come from so far away, and it became entertainment rather than something that I can do something about, or I can engage in relationships. And that is so us, that it becomes almost entertainment. We just consume it. It's not always good, positive entertainment, but we consume it as if it's just something that means nothing and we don't have to do anything about it.
Right.
It goes back to the importance of, and I love the fact that you're talking about this grassroots idea of starting in our communities, because it's really the only way to attack a very, very big, broad problem. And it takes each individual in their own backyard to make the difference. And I'm hoping that we see that we can start seeing some change that'll make a huge difference in our communities and in our kids' lives. As a new dad, I can tell you I'm already nervous about what teenage life looks like when all this stuff starts becoming something for my child to consume. It's an overwhelming feeling. It really is, and you hope that we can navigate it well. I'm curious, Chris.
I always think, Tyler, too, that the media gets so surprised whenever it doesn't go the way they thought it was going to go, and they totally kind of think that everybody's watching them or everybody's being influenced by them. When the reality is there's a whole bunch of stuff going on out in the real world that has nothing to do with the media. And I think the power of people, the power of community, the power of individuals, the power of leadership that exists totally apart from social media or any other media is totally, it's really the key to our culture and holding us together and allowing us to make a positive difference. And what you're doing, Christine, at the local church level is being duplicated over and over and over again in communities. And that's the hope of the world.
Yes.
To me, that's the hope of the world.
Christine, you've accomplished a lot in your short life so far, but tell us, what do you consider your greatest achievement? You've done a lot, you've written a lot, you've accomplished a lot, but what is your greatest achievement so far in your life?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would say enduring in the faith. Sometimes I just think I want to make it to the end. I want to endure. And I have so far, and I am thankful by God's grace that He has sustained me. At the same, I think, and similar to that is my marriage, being married 20 years. And I really enjoy being married to my husband, and I love what we have been able to do together. And then I'm saying several things. I guess you asked me the most important thing, but enduring in ministry is another. That would fall under the endurance category. We've been doing this 20 years together, and I look sometimes around at faithful pastors who retire, or they serve for 50 years in the ministry, and I really admire and respect that, knowing what that took. And so I'm thankful that that's where we are right now, and my hope and prayer is that we will be those people that endure in ministry as well. So I'm really thankful for that in my life right now.
You've done a lot of ministry for women, and I'm curious. I know you've written 5 books, but I know that you, of course, like any other author, are inspired by other authors. What would be a book or 2, or however many you want to list, for maybe some of our listeners out there that could maybe give them a boost, give them a little bit of inspiration in a fairly rough time?
Oh, Well, I love to read. That's a really hard question. What comes to mind, especially with our current political and social climate, is the book, The Warmth of Other Suns. Have you read that?
The Warmth of Other Suns?
Yes, it's by Isabel Wilkerson, and it's basically a narrative nonfiction book about several families who migrated from the South to the North. They were African-American families, and so it describes why they left the South and what they experienced when they got to the North. And it's just such a well-written book, super fascinating. And then one of my favorite all-time books is the book called Notes from a Tilt-A-Whirl by Indy Wilson. Have you heard of that?
I have not, but I'll take notes.
Okay, it's a very unusual book, but it is so good. It's the most unique book I've ever read, and I just reread it over and over because it's just beautiful, and it causes you to see the world in a totally different way.
You just authored your 5th book. It's fairly new. Tell us about that and kind of what inspired you to write that.
Yeah, it's called With All Your Heart, and really looks at the kingdom of God. What is the kingdom of God, and what does it mean to seek first the kingdom of God? I mean, I've heard that all my life, and I didn't really understand what that meant. And that's where it came from. It's just, I was reading the book of Matthew, and just like, Jesus keeps talking about the kingdom of God, and I don't even really understand what he's saying. At the same time, there were some things in my life that were happening where I just felt so depleted. I used the terms at the beginning of the book. The very first line is grieved and starved. I felt grieved and I felt starved. And I just felt like I could not figure out what was going on in my life. And it was over the course of several months where God just showed me that there were things in my life that I was pursuing and seeking that were good things, but I had put them above him. And so my heart was divided, and I was starting to bear the fruit of that. So seeking the approval of other people, for instance, and serving for the approval of other people. And so it was kind of the combination of that. I was reading Matthew, I was thinking about these things, and I was reading that verse, seek first the kingdom of God. And I wasn't doing that. And so I needed to work through that. And I did. And then I wanted other people, I'm still working through that, but I wanted other people to know what I was seeing and learning, because I see it's a lot about how these subtle things pull us away from having an undivided devotion to Christ. So things like anxiety or isolation, some of the things that we were just talking about, being not in relationship with people. So that's what it's about.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, Christine, this has been fun. What a rich life that you've already led, and excited to get to be a part, at least a small part of your family's life in Charlottesville, and excited to watch you guys continue to grow and tackle this amazing journey for sure. Dr. Blair, you have to we have to get the trivia answer. I want to give Christine the guess. I think I've got it. But,
okay,
Christine, who is it?
Is it Coach Wooden?
Whoa, way to go. Nice.
Right.
Nice. Yeah. The Wizard of Westwood, he was called. And, amazing coach. But imagine the influence of this guy who, the leader of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton, and making sure that they he had rules that you don't curse and you don't criticize your teammates. Can you imagine that in today's sports world, right? And the amazing commitment he had to building character and leaders. I just love him. And his book, Wooden on Leadership, is a valuable book for your library. I will commend that.
Well, thanks for that, Blair. Well done, Christine, the great John Wooden. Well, folks, that is a wrap for our podcast today. On behalf of the International Student Foundation, the Carrington Group, and of course our special guest, Christine Hoover, we really want to wish each of you a good day. And remember this, If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, or become more, then you are a leader. Have a great week.
Legends in Leadership is brought to you by the Carrington Group. Carrington Group is a family office with a passion for helping business leaders and their families make smart choices and fulfill their highest aspirations. To learn more about the Carrington Group, visit their website at www.carringtonfo.com or Google Carrington Group, Dallas, Texas. ISF is committed to leadership development for aged-out foster care and orphaned youth. ISF's mission is to transform these youth into tomorrow's leaders with scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. To learn more about ISF, visit their website at isfsite.org or Google International Student Foundation to learn more.
Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Regal Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors are affiliated entities. Carrington Group and this broadcast are independent of Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors.
Thanks for having